I am going to tell this once and I am not going to tell it again after this, so pay attention. My name is Harlan Combs and I was the shift foreman on the number 6 drift entry at the Consolidated Coal Operation in Letcher County, Kentucky in the fall of 1938. I have not spoken about what happened at that operation to anyone outside my immediate family since the year it happened, and 2 of the 3 men I told at the time are dead, and the third is not well, and I am 81 years old, and I have decided that the account should exist somewhere outside my own memory before my memory is no longer available to anyone. I want to be clear about why I am telling this now, rather than sooner. It is not that I disbelieved what I saw. I believed it from the night it happened, and I have believed it every day since. The reason I have not told it is simpler than that. I worked in the coal industry in eastern Kentucky for 37 years after 1938, and in that industry, in that region, a man's credibility is the only currency he has that cannot be taken from him by the company or the market or a bad season. I was not willing to spend that currency on an account that the people I worked with would have used to decide I was unfit for the work. The work was what kept my family fed. The account waited. The account has waited long enough. The number 6 drift entry ran into the hillside on the east face of a ridge above Sandlick Creek in Letcher County. A drift entry is a horizontal tunnel driven directly into the coal seam from the surface, as opposed to a slope entry that angles down or a shaft entry that goes straight down. The number 6 seam in that part of Letcher County ran about 42 inches thick, which is workable but not generous. You spent your shift on your knees or bent at the waist, and after 10 years of that, your back knew it. I had been working that seam for 6 years when the events I am going to describe occurred. The work we were doing that October was a retreat mining operation. We had finished the advance cut and were pulling coal back out toward the portal, leaving a worked section behind us as we went. Retreat mining in a 42-inch seam in 1938 meant hand-loading, timber setting, and working in sections that were coming down behind you as you pulled back. It is not work for men who are troubled by tight spaces or the sound of settling rock. The crew I had were not troubled by either. They had been working underground in Letcher County since most of them were old enough to hold a loading shovel, and the number 6 seam was not the worst or the tightest they had worked. The hollow below the number 6 entry was called Cane Hollow. It ran roughly north to south between 2 ridge lines, maybe a quarter-mile wide at its broadest point, with Sandlick Creek running along its western edge and a mixed forest of second-growth hardwood and hemlock covering the slopes and the hollow floor. It was not good farmland, too steep, too shaded, the soil thin over the rock, and the families that had lived in that part of Letcher County for generations had largely left the hollow floor alone. There were no structures in Cane Hollow below the mine operation. There were no roads. The only regular human presence was the mine crew going in and out of the number 6 entry on the east face above it, and the occasional hunter working the ridgeline in deer season. The hollow had a reputation among the older men in the area, though I did not learn the specifics of that reputation until after the events of October. Men who had grown up in Letcher County knew to stay out of Cane Hollow after dark. When I asked about it directly after everything had happened, the answers I got were not specific. They knew to stay out. Their fathers had known to stay out. That was the extent of the articulated knowledge. A behavioral rule without an attached explanation passed down through the generations the way such rules are passed down in those hills. As fact rather than story. The men I need to account for are as follows. Because they were there and the account belongs to them as much as it belongs to me. Boyd Caudle, Willie Sexton, Orville Banks, Raymond Combs, who was my second cousin, Luther Frazier, Pete Brock, Junior Napier, Chester Holbrook, Dewey Hall, and Arlie Mills. 11 men, including myself. Most were from Letcher County. All had been underground before. None of them had been underground for what we found in Cane Hollow that October. The first indication was the smell. I want to describe it because it was the first thing that was wrong, and because it has stayed with me for 43 years in a way that most sensory memories do not stay. It arrived on the second Monday of October, 1938, in the early morning as we were walking in from the mine road to the entry portal. A smell from the hollow below us. Not from the mine, not from our equipment, not from anything we had brought with us. It came up from the hollow floor with the morning fog, the way smells move in cold air, heavy and low. It was organic. It was large in the way that smells are large when the thing producing them is large. It was not carrion, and it was not rot, and it was not any animal I had knowledge of in those hills. Boyd Caudle asked me what it was. I told him I did not know. That was the truth. We went underground. The smell was present every morning for the next 4 days. By the third day, the men had stopped asking about it and had started avoiding the subject, which is what men do when a thing unsettles them and they do not have language for the unsettlement. We went underground each morning and came out each evening, and the smell was there in the morning and gone by midday when the fog had lifted, and none of us spoke about it directly. On the 5th day, we found the kills. The path from the mine road to the number 6 portal ran along the top edge of the hollow for about 200 yards before it cut up the face to the entry. Below that path, down the slope maybe 30 or 40 feet, was the hollow floor. On the 5th morning, coming in before dawn with our cap lamps, Willie Sexton stopped on the path and pointed his lamp down the slope. There were 3 deer carcasses on the hollow floor that I could count from the path. Large deer, bucks by the size of them, laid out within about 50 feet of each other, not scattered the way animals are when a predator works them over a wide area. Grouped, close together on the flat ground near the creek, in a rough arrangement that did not suggest natural predation. I sent Orville Banks and Raymond Combs down the slope to look while the rest of us waited on the path. They were gone about 10 minutes. When they came back, Orville said the deer had been killed by something big. The wounds were heavy, blunt trauma, no claw or bite marks on the carcasses, and none of the 3 had been fed on. Raymond said the ground around the carcasses was disturbed in a way that showed heavy foot traffic, and the impressions in the soft creek-banked mud were large. He held his hands about a foot apart to indicate the length. I told the crew to leave the hollow alone, and we went underground. I spent that shift underground thinking about 3 things. The smell, the grouped carcasses with no feeding, and the impressions in the creek mud. By the time we came out that evening, I had assembled those 3 things into a working conclusion that I did not share with the crew because I did not yet know what to do with it. The second indication came 4 days later. The smell had become a constant by that point. Not just morning fog, present at all hours, stronger some days than others. The men had taken to not commenting on it at all, which told me the accommodation they had made to it internally. On the 9th day of October, coming out of the portal at the end of the evening shift, we found that our equipment shed had been disturbed. The shed was a simple structure, timber frame, corrugated metal roof, a hasp lock on the door that a determined man could pull off the frame without much effort. The hasp had been pulled off, not broken. Pulled, the screws drawn clean out of the wood. Inside, the equipment was moved but not taken. The timber bracing we stored there, the drill steel, the powder box, moved to the sides of the shed as though something had entered and needed the floor clear. The powder box was intact. Nothing had been opened or damaged. The shed had been entered and rearranged and the door pulled off, and whatever had done it had not taken anything. I put a new hasp on the door with longer screws and told the crew nothing had been taken and we were not going to change our schedule over a shed break-in. On the 11th day of October, the Dogmen came up from the hollow. I want to be precise about what we saw and what we did not see, because precision is what I owe the account after 43 years of carrying it. We were coming out of the portal at approximately 6 in the evening, full dark already in early October in those hills, cap lamps on. The path down the face to the mine road ran through a section of second-growth timber. Young chestnuts and maples, not dense but enough cover to limit your visibility beyond about 40 feet at night. I was last out, behind Arlie Mills, who was second to last. I heard them before I saw them. Movement in the timber below the path between us and the mine road, multiple sources, heavy, not running. Moving through the timber in a way that was purposeful and was not any animal I had worked around in Letcher County hills. The weight behind the footfalls was wrong, the cadence was wrong, and there were too many of them. I counted at least 4 distinct sound sources before I stopped counting and focused on what was in front of me. Arlie had stopped. I came up beside him and I put my hand on his arm and I held my lamp toward the timber below. What I saw in the lamplight at the edge of its reach, 30, maybe 35 feet down the slope, were shapes, large shapes, moving laterally across the slope, not coming directly up toward us. Dark, heavy through the chest and shoulder, moving on 2 legs with a gait that was too long in the stride and too low in the center of gravity for any man. I saw 3 of them clearly. There were more in the dark beyond my lamp's reach. I could hear them. They were not moving toward us. They were moving across the slope, parallel to the path, heading south along the face of the ridge in the same direction we needed to go to reach the mine road. Moving fast, moving as if they had a destination and we were not it. Arlie said one word, just the one. Then he was quiet. I watched them cross through my lamplight for about 20 seconds. Then the last of them was past and the sounds of their movement faded south along the ridge, and there was nothing in my lamp's reach but the timber and the slope. I told Arlie to keep moving and we went down the path to the mine road, and I got the crew together and counted them, and we went to the vehicles and we left. Nobody spoke on the way down the hollow road. That is not a dramatic statement about the weight of what we had seen. It is a statement about 11 Kentucky coal miners who knew that there was nothing useful to say and so said nothing. I went to the mine superintendent the following morning and I told him that I had seen large animals in the timber on the ridge face the prior evening, that I believed they were dangerous, and that I was recommending we suspend the number 6 operation until the situation could be assessed. The superintendent was a man named Frank Stidham from Hazard originally, who had been running operations for Consolidated Coal in Letcher County for about 12 years. He was not an unreasonable man in ordinary circumstances. He asked me what kind of animals. I told him I could not identify them in the dark. He asked me if I was certain they were dangerous. I told him I was not certain, but I was recommending caution based on the evidence from the hollow. The carcasses, the shed break-in, the track evidence at the creek. He asked me how big, and I told him bigger than any man. And he looked at me for a moment, and then he told me we were 3 weeks from the end of the contract and he was not suspending operations over deer and a shed break-in. I want to tell you that I argued. I did not argue. I had made my recommendation and it had been declined, and the next step in the chain of authority above Frank Stidham was a district manager in Hazard who I had never met. I was a shift foreman in 1938 in Letcher County, Kentucky. The Depression had been running for 9 years. Men in Letcher County had been hungry enough in the early 30s that the company store had been the only thing standing between some of those families and starvation. And the company knew it. And the leverage that knowledge gave the company over the men who worked for it was total. I had a wife and 3 children in a company house. I did not argue. We went back in the following morning. I did not tell the crew what the superintendent had said. I told them we were continuing the shift, and I told them that until further notice nobody walked the path to the portal alone, We moved in a group, and we did not go down to the hollow floor under any circumstances. Junior Napier asked me what we were watching for. I told him to watch for the same animals we had seen the evening before and to stay with the group. That was the full extent of my disclosure, and I am not proud of it, but it was what I could offer within the constraints I was operating under. The crew accommodated to the situation the way the Kentucky mining men I knew accommodated to most things. Without drama, with a watchful quiet that replaced ordinary conversation on the walk-in and the walk-out, with a tendency to move in tighter formation than the path required. They did not discuss what they had seen and heard with each other in my presence, which probably meant they discussed it extensively without me. By the end of the first week, they had developed a set of informal practices. Specific men walking specific positions in the group, certain men responsible for watching particular angles on the path that nobody had assigned and nobody had explicitly agreed to. They had organized themselves for the situation without being told to. I have thought about that across a long time since. 11 Kentucky coal miners in 1938. Men who had been working underground in dangerous conditions since their boyhood. Men who understood the arithmetic of collective safety in a way that only people who have faced lethal risk together understand. Those men organized themselves in response to what was in that timber without a word being said about it directly. That organization was its own kind of testimony to what they had seen and heard on the ridge face. You do not rearrange your walking formation for deer. The dogmen were in the timber on the ridge face every evening for the next 6 days. I know this because I was watching for them and I saw them or heard them on every one of those evenings as we came out of the portal. I want to account for each of those evenings briefly because the pattern across the 6 days is part of what I have thought about longest. The first evening after we saw them, the 12th of October, I heard them in the timber below the path but could not place them with my lamp. Sound only, movement south along the ridge, heavy and fast, then gone. The men heard it too. Nobody spoke about it on the way down. The second evening I saw 2 of them clearly at the lamp's edge, moving fast through the timber about 40 feet below the path. Same direction, same pace. Chester Holbrook was beside me when I saw them, and he saw them too, and he crossed himself, which was not something I had ever seen Chester Holbrook do in 6 years of working beside him. The third evening there were more of them. I could not count accurately in the dark and the timber, but the sound suggested at least 6, maybe 8. Moving south in a loose group, not together but in the same direction at roughly the same time. The way animals move when they are responding to a shared pressure rather than following a leader. They passed us in maybe 45 seconds and were gone. The fourth evening was the one that told me the most. I had positioned myself at the edge of the portal to watch from higher ground as the crew came down, which gave me a better angle on the timber below the path. 3 dogmen passed through a section where the timber thinned enough that I had a clear view for about 4 seconds in my lamplight. Full view, not obscured, 30 feet below me on the slope. I am not going to pretend I was calm about that. I was not. But I watched and I noted, and I will tell you what I saw. They were large, larger than any man and heavier than any man, built for power in the chest and shoulder in a way that was wrong for the proportions of the rest of them. The legs too long, the neck too short, the head too big at the back. Their color in the lamplight was dark, brown-black, and the coat was shaggy enough that the wind moving through the timber moved it. They ran in a gait that was not a man's run and not a bear's run. A forward lean, the arms driving, the feet hitting heavy, fast, covering ground, with the efficiency that told you this was how they were built to move. And in those 4 seconds, as they passed through my lamp's clear view, all 3 of them turned their heads and looked back north toward the hollow. Not at me, back toward the hollow. Over their shoulders, running south, looking north. The 5th evening I saw only one briefly at the far edge of the lamp. The 6th evening, The last evening, and nothing. No sounds, no movement. The timber below the path was as quiet as it had been on the first morning before any of this started, and I stood at the edge of the portal for a long time listening and heard only the creak at the bottom of the hollow and the wind in the ridge timber and the sound of my own crew behind me waiting to go home. What they were going toward, I do not know. What they were coming from, I also do not know. What I know is that something in Cane Hollow was driving them south along that ridge every evening in October of 1938, and whatever it was drove them south past us every evening without stopping. And on the evenings when I could see them in the lamplight, they were not looking at us. They were looking back over their shoulders toward the hollow. That is the detail I have thought about most in 43 years. They were moving fast. They were moving with purpose, and they were looking back toward Cane Hollow as they passed. Not at us. Past us, behind us, toward the hollow below the path. Everyone I saw clearly enough to read its orientation was oriented the same way. Moving south, looking back north. Moving away from something. On the 17th of October, the last evening of the contract, coming out of the portal for the final time, there were no dogmen on the ridge face. I heard nothing in the timber. The smell that had been present every morning for 2 weeks was gone. The hollow below the path was quiet in a way that it had not been quiet since the second Monday of October. It was not the quiet of an empty place. I have been in empty places in the hills, and I know what that quiet sounds like. This was the quiet of a place that has been vacated. The dogmen were gone. Whatever had been in Cane Hollow below us was still there. I could feel it the way you feel a weight on the other side of a closed door. But the dogmen were gone, and the hollow was silent, and we walked down the path to the mine road for the last time and drove out and did not go back. The number 6 contract was not renewed. The operation closed at the end of October and the equipment was pulled out. I heard later, maybe 2 years afterward, that the company had tried to restart the number 6 entry in the spring of 1940 with a new crew out of Letcher County, and had shut it down after 3 days without giving a public reason. I do not know if that crew saw or heard anything in Cane Hollow. I never found anyone from that crew to ask, and I did not look hard because I already knew what the hollow held, and I did not need their account to confirm it. I worked 37 more years in the coal industry in eastern Kentucky, and I did not work another operation in Letcher County. I had opportunities and I declined them. My reasons were my own, and I did not explain them to anyone who asked, and over time people stopped asking. I want to tell you what I think happened in Cane Hollow in October of 1938, because I have had 43 years to form a theory, and I am going to share it. With the understanding that it is a theory and not a fact, and I cannot prove any part of it. Something lived in that hollow, something large enough that the dogmen, which are themselves large enough that 11 Kentucky miners organized their walking formation to account for them. Something large enough that the dogmen did not want to be near it after dark. Every evening they moved south along the ridge face, looking back over their shoulders toward the hollow, moving away from something that was in that hollow or coming up out of it as the dark settled. They were not moving because of us. We were on the path above them, and they passed us every evening without acknowledgement. They were moving because of what was below them. What was below them I did not see. I heard the hollow at night from the path on several of those evenings as we walked down. Sounds from the creek bottom, sounds from the hollow floor, sounds that I am going to describe as large and water-associated and not consistent with anything I have knowledge of in those hills. I heard those sounds on 3 separate evenings, and on none of those 3 evenings did the dogmen linger on the ridge face. They moved through faster on the evenings when the sounds from the hollow were clearest. The grouped carcasses that Orville and Raymond found on the 5th morning were not a hunting outcome. 3 adult bucks, heavy blunt trauma, no feeding. They were placed. I do not know what placed them or what the placement was intended to accomplish or communicate. I know that the dogmen passed within 30 feet of those carcasses every evening on their way south and did not stop at them, which tells you something about the relationship between the dogmen and whatever had put those deer on the hollow floor. You do not ignore a kill placed in your path unless the thing that placed it outranks you. I am 81 years old. Boyd Caudle is gone. Willie Sexton is gone. Raymond Combs is gone. Most of them are gone. Arlie Mills is still living, last I knew, in a care facility in Pikeville. I have not spoken to Arlie about this in 20 years. What we said to each other the last time the subject came up was not much. We were old men and the distance was 40 years by then, and the words for it had never fully existed in the first place. Cane Hollow is still there. I have driven past the mouth of it twice in the past 10 years on my way through Letcher County for other reasons. I did not stop. I did not go up the hollow road. Whatever arrangement had been made in that hollow in the fall of 1938 between the dogmen and the thing that drove them south every evening, that arrangement was not made with me and is not my concern. The hollow belongs to something else. It has belonged to something else since before the number 6 contract. And it will belong to something else after I am gone. And the only thing I know with certainty about what that something is that the dogmen moved south every evening rather than stay near it. That is enough to know. That is more than enough. That